And I thought, I'm going to throw up like right now. But we had to do what we had to do, and I had to lead that.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm Seth Irby, a 2011 graduate from LSU and a member of SIGAP's Louisiana Beta chapter. And this is Built to Win, where we break down the real stories and real playbooks behind the excellence of SIGAPs after their college years. Today's guest sits in the category almost nobody in American business history can claim. Open your refrigerator, walk into your child's playroom, and you'll find items that represent Bob Eckert's successful career. He took an Arizona Beta SIGAP degree, climbed Kraft Foods for 23 years to become CEO, then took over Mattel, two of the most iconic American brands in two industries most people would think don't translate. Today, on Built to Win, the playbook for building a career that travels. To this day, he's one of the small handful of executives in American history who have run two Fortune 500 companies in completely different industries, and he's won at both. Make sure you're subscribed. Share this with a brother who's trying to figure out what to chase, and follow along for more stories like this. Now let's get into it. Bob, before we get into Kraft, Mattel, the brands, the board seats, give us something about yourself that isn't easy to find online. What should our listeners know about you that they can't find in your bio?
I was a surprisingly boring kid, really up until I got to the University of Arizona and SIGAP. But I was an average student. I was not a stellar athlete. I lived a good middle-class life growing up. And I was kind of a middle-of-the-class kid, but it all looked out okay.
So let's talk about that childhood. You grew up in Elmhurst, Illinois. When you look back, how did that environment end up shaping the person you became?
It was really what shaped me was my parents. I was very fortunate to have terrific parents, and I got the values of honesty and integrity and a strong work ethic and the kinds of things we talk about at SIGAP. That was consistent with how I was raised. So it wasn't so much the environment that affected me. It was probably the household in which I was raised.
So Bob, speaking of SIGAP, I'm sure you've heard this before, but there was something in the water in Tucson, Arizona back in the mid-'70s. Both you and Terry Lundgren, Arizona Beta brothers, who went on to run Fortune 500 companies. Tell us about the chapter during that time and a story that stands out from your experience.
It was a terrific experience, Seth. We had a wonderful chapter, great group of guys, very closely bonded from all over the country. We enjoyed intramural sports. We enjoyed the athletics. We enjoyed the camaraderie, all the things SIGAP were part of that chapter. And there were quite a few folks that became lawyers or doctors or business people. Not surprisingly, I think we recruited pretty well and we bonded really well. A story that some might not think about, but was impressive to me, Seth, is I remember being rushed by a couple of seniors, and they showed up in my dorm room like 1 minute before I'm ready to walk out the door. I'm literally combing my hair, and here they comes the knock on the door. And sure enough, after I joined the chapter, I learned that that's part of the system, is we wanted to be there 2 minutes early, not 2 minutes late. So the guy's combing his hair, and you're supposed to show up, and that's exactly what happened to me. And believe it or not, that made a huge impression on me.
An incredible life lesson that you can use personally and professionally as well. It's funny, the small things that stick with you.
Absolutely. You know, I live by the old adage, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late.
That's right. So throughout our conversation, I'm going to throw in some rapid fire questions just to help listeners get to know you a little bit better. And the first round each round has a theme, and the first round's theme is your favorites. So we'll start with your favorite sports team.
Got to go with the Cubs.
Favorite meal.
I still like a Big Mac.
Favorite app on your phone.
Got to be ESPN. I'm on it all day.
What is your favorite book that has shaped your thinking over the years?
It's a play, actually. Thornton Wilder, Our Town, a 3-act play that we all read probably in the 8th grade if we grew up in America. And the storyline ends with a young woman named Emily who dies during childbirth, and she goes off to the other place, but then she wants to revisit a day in her life, and she does, and it doesn't go like she remembered it. It was her 12th birthday. And the moral of the story is at the end of the play, she says, does anybody really value life while they're living it? And the narrator says, essentially, no. And that's stuck with me. We need to value our life and live our life every day because, someday it's over and you got to enjoy the ride while you can.
Amen. So well said. So let's talk about really the beginning of your ride, your career ride. Day one, 22 years old, fresh MBA, you're walking into Kraft as an entry-level hire. And forget the resume version. What were you actually doing those first couple of years at Kraft? And what did that entry-level work teach you that you couldn't have learned at business school?
There were 6 of us who joined that day. I was wearing a light blue window pane plaid suit. And I, incredibly nervous. And I started in marketing research because during my college years, one of the last jobs I had was doing door-to-door marketing research, knocking on doors and interviewing people for marketing research projects. And I parlayed that into the job at Kraft in marketing research. So that's where I started. I spent the first year in marketing research, then most of the rest of my career in the marketing ranks. And one of the lessons I learned early in my tenure was to hang out with the folks who were 50 and 60 years old who were someday we were going to replace when they retired in the marketing ranks. And I would have breakfast with these folks every morning at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning in the company cafeteria and listen to war stories. And so I learned more by listening to the people who had done the job and who had been around the company for decades. I learned a lot more doing that than I did in school.
Bob, I think that's such an important insight for our undergraduates because I think from their shoes, when they graduate, they probably feel like those employees that have been in the workplace for decades don't want to spend time with them. But in fact, it's probably the opposite. How did those older employees receive you, and how did that shape your experience?
They were incredibly supportive. They wanted our next generation to succeed, just as today I want the students we're talking to succeed. So people do reach a stage in their careers and their lives where giving back is really important to them. And they welcomed me with open arms. And I learned so much from these folks who'd been on the job for years or decades ahead of me.
So you spent 23 years inside one company before you got the top job. That's not a climb. That's loyalty and relentless focus in one place, which can be rare these days. You joined Kraft Foods straight out of Northwestern in 1977, but didn't become CEO until 1997. So what does a climb that long actually build inside a person that you can't fully appreciate for a quicker, faster sprint?
Well, it is a little bit about persistence, Seth, but it's also the fact that Kraft was such a large organization with so many brands, Oscar Mayer or Kraft Singles or Miracle Whip or General Foods brands like coffees and cereals, Post cereal. There were so many different brands that any individual job I had within Kraft usually lasted only about 3 years. So I had a fresh start every few years. And I believed in the old adage, it takes you a year to sort of learn a job. It takes you another year to really do the job. And by the 3rd year, you're really adding value and making a difference. And then we started the cycle all over again. So I moved around Kraft quite a bit in those 23 years.
Most leaders won't admit this, but there's always that one decision earlier in your career that might send you somewhere else. A job offer, a frustration, a moment that you were wondering if you picked wrong. Was there a moment like that at Kraft for you, and what made you stay?
There was. It was middle of that climb, if you will. I was kind of the young buck and hard charger and worked hard and thought I was doing well and was told I was doing well. And there was an opening at the vice president of marketing level. And even though I was a bit young and maybe a junior, I thought I was totally ready for the job. But they didn't give me that job. They went outside and hired an older guy who was probably 20 years older than I was. And I was a little anxious about that. But then I got more anxious when I realized he and I didn't have the same values. We didn't have the same work ethic. And my conclusion was, sometime in 12, 18 months, either he's not going to be in the company or I'm not going to be in the company. Because if this is where the company's going, it's not for me. Fortunately, he woke up one day and decided it wasn't for him and he left. I got the job and it all worked out well after that.
So speaking of people that shape your careers, I would imagine that every Fortune 500 CEO has that one person who saw something in them before they even saw it in themselves. Who was that person for you at Kraft, and what did they do for you that really accelerated your career?
I had several folks that were influential for me, but probably the most significant one was my first boss, a fellow named Hugh Jolly. He was one of those guys who was 60 years old when I was 21 or 22 years old. And he essentially put his arm around me as an employee, as a new employee, and taught me the ropes and befriended me. And we worked together. And he and I worked together, even though I had different assignments every 3 or 4 years. He and I probably worked together 3 or 4 times. And he treated me a little bit like a son, a little bit like an upperclassman would treat a lowerclassman coming into SIGEP. He befriended me and he helped me, and it made a big difference early in my career.
While we have a lot of undergraduate listeners, we also have a number of young alumni or seasoned professionals that manage and mentor people. What advice do you have for them that you saw in action at Kraft early in your career? How can we be great mentors for that next generation?
I think about it in terms of helping someone with his or her resume. So today, my resume is pretty complete. There's nothing I'm going to work on that really is going to make a big difference in my resume. My career is what it has been. But when I'm thinking about the next generation, my motivation is to help them make their resume as good as it can be.
Well said. Well said. So in 1997, we'll fast forward to after 20 years inside Kraft, you become CEO of a $17.5 billion company. Take us inside the first 90 days. I mean, what was the first big call you had to make? And what did it teach you about being that leader at the top and not just a great executive?
Well, it was an important time for me because I became, instead of just one of, call it at the time, 20 people who reported to the CEO, I became the CEO. So I went from being a peer to this group to being the leader of the group. And that was a little challenging. But people were supportive and they wanted me to succeed, the group from which I came. One of the big decisions I had to make very early in my tenure was, we needed to fire United Way. Kraft was a big supporter of United Way in Chicago, the charitable organization. And we always had leadership roles in the United Way Pledge annual drive. But Philip Morris owned Kraft at the time I became CEO. And Philip Morris had its own version of United Way that it funded itself and eliminated all of the overhead and gave out its own contributions and donations to social causes. So Philip Morris had pressured my predecessor into leaving United Way and joining the Philip Morris theme. He resisted, but when I got the job, he said to me, now one of the first things you're going to have to do, Bob, is fire United Way. And so I did. It was hard to go to my community peers. These are not Kraft peers. These are other large companies in Chicago that support United Way. And I had to tell them that we were checking out. And I think I did it like day 2. Because it was one of those things, if you don't do it quickly, you're going to own it. So, if I don't say United Way, it's time to go today, a year or 2 from now, it's not going to be quite as easy. And I remember wrestling with it, but it worked out okay.
23 years inside one company for many people is a complete career, but you weren't done. And we'll get there. But before we go to Mattel, when you look back now, what did Kraft actually give you that made everything else after it possible?
Kraft gave me opportunities, and it was a terrific culture for me. They let me make mistakes. I made mistakes that easily could have been fireable offenses. But I didn't get fired. I learned my lesson. My leadership knew I learned my lesson, and they allowed me to move on and keep tracking. And not every environment is that open, and not every environment is willing to invest in people the way Kraft invested in folks like me. So the lesson I learned from that was when it's my time to create an environment, to create a culture, when I went to Mattel and became the CEO of a publicly traded company, and I wanted to be responsible for the culture, I had the lessons I learned from Kraft in mind.
So let's talk about Mattel. It's May of 2000. You leave CEO seat of one of the largest food companies in North America to take over a large toy company on the other side of the country. You've talked publicly about this flight that you had out to Los Angeles. And there was a moment where you actually asked yourself, what have I done? Take us inside that flight and what was actually going through your head in that moment?
It was a long flight. I remember flying from Chicago, where Kraft is headquartered, to New York first thing in the morning, because that's where Philip Morris, the parent company at the time, was headquartered. So I went to Philip Morris to resign. I then got on a phone call to accept the offer from Mattel, and then flew across the country from New York to Los Angeles to start my first day at Mattel. And it did dawn on me. I was the product of a great culture. I had a wonderful 23 years at Kraft. And now I'm stepping into a place that I don't know the toy business. I don't know the people. I don't know really much what's going on other than Mattel needed a new leader. And I took the job, and Los Angeles is a great place to live. But it kind of hits you every once in a while, right at you with what am I doing here? I mean, this is pretty high risk. And the mindset I had was, well, if I can get through a year, maybe I can get through 3 years. And if I can get through 3 years, I can figure out the rest after that. So it's a little bit crawl before you walk, before you run. I just needed to get through the first 90 days and ultimately the first year. And I did.
So talk us through that start. I mean, you just said you hadn't worked in toys. You had a lot to learn about the people and the customers. What was the first thing you did to figure out the business?
Two things. The first day on the job, we had an all hands-on worldwide video meeting. And I made a point of what I thought our priorities were going to be as long as I was there. And that was three things. We were going to build brands, we were going to cut costs, and we were going to develop people. And we ultimately did those things. But how I learned the business was by talking to people. My view is most people want to do well when they show up at work. Most people want to succeed in their job and in their career. And most people know what's going on. It may not always go up the ladder the way you'd like it, but if you talk to enough people, you get a pretty good sense for what's going on. And I certainly didn't know the toy business, and I didn't know Mattel. I didn't grow up at Mattel. I didn't grow up in the culture. So I spent a lot of time just talking to people and listening to people and asking them what was going on. And they shared their stories, and they shared what we thought we ought to do. And my point ultimately was, hey, there are some clouds over this company because of the bad acquisition we had done. My goal is to clear away those clouds and let us do what we do really, really well in the toy business. And they delivered.
Most CEOs would tell you the hardest part of taking that new top job is the business itself. But what ended up being the hardest part for you, and what ended up being easier than you thought it would be making that transition?
The hardest part was trying to influence the culture. The company had been around for 45 years before I got there, and I wanted to shape the culture, and that takes time and effort and persistence. That was more challenging than I thought it would be. And one of the reasons I took the job, Seth, is in the very first interview I had for the job, the lead director of Mattel, I was asking him about the culture, and he said, Bob, if you're the CEO, the culture is anything you want it to be. And so instead of being a product of the culture, which is what I was at Kraft, I had the opportunity to shape the culture at Mattel. But it took time and effort to do that. The easiest part was actually fixing the business. The business was in trouble. We were losing $1 million cash a day. And what I learned was the easiest way to fix the business is just stop doing stupid stuff. Somehow you made some mistakes, you did some stupid stuff. And if you just quit doing those things, business will come back. And it did.
I want to go back to your point about shaping culture, because I think in the fraternity world, we're in the culture shaping business. I mean, we have undergraduates all across campuses, all over the country, and they're trying to create a certain type of culture that turns young men into better students, better leaders, and ultimately better professionals after college. What advice would you give those young men leading those chapters on how to shape culture?
Number one, they've already done the right thing by being associated with SIGEP. SIGEP has a culture. And it's public about its culture. It's public about what we're trying to do with young men. And that was an influence on me. So we've already got a really good starting point if you're an undergrad or a grad student or a recent alum. The other thing I would say is to stick to your values. Again, I was the product of a really wonderful childhood with great parents, but each of us has values. And our values are consistent with SIGEP's values, or we wouldn't be here. And so if we could live our values, live SIGEP's values, and be open with people about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish, and be straight with people, have integrity, be virtuous, if you will, that works.
That's incredible, simple advice, right? Use the values as a guide to not only shape the culture, but you've got to model that as leaders, which I think is really important for our undergraduate chapter officers to hear. So here's a misconception that I think a lot of undergraduates listening right now might have. When you're 20-something years old and you pick a major and you take your first job and you start in the industry, you believe that those might lock you into a certain career. But your career is direct evidence that it doesn't have to, that you can pivot. So what would you say right now to that SIGEP that's listening, that's worried they've already painted themselves into a corner?
I had the same worry, and I made a big mistake when I was an undergraduate. I was a marketing major in undergraduate, and I was a marketing major in business school. I've taken every single marketing class anybody's ever heard of. That's what I went to school to learn, to be a marketer. And I missed the opportunity to get a terrific broad education. I went to a very large land-grant state university with 40,000 students in a big campus and had everything to offer. Some terrific things, like I got interested in art later in life. Gosh, I could have had a couple of art history classes and I would have known about art a lot more than I do. I didn't take enough humanities kinds of classes. I didn't take enough hard science kinds of classes because I wanted to take marketing classes. And so if we pigeonhole ourselves too much, I think we're wasting the opportunity that's in front of us to be broad. Because the bottom line is, of the probably 20 marketing courses I took between undergraduate and graduate school, I didn't use much of any of that. I used a lot of other things that I would have been better at had I had a broader experience in college. So my advice to undergrads in particular is don't overly specialize. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Don't think that you've got to take every class in an area to be competent in an area, because once you get out of school, you're going to learn the stuff that counts.
What I hear from you there is use college to explore. It is that one time in life where you truly have the freedom to explore and learn. And if you do that, then the world will be open to you.
Absolutely. And it pays off later in life, Seth. I would have been a better adult. I would have been a better CEO had I taken advantage of the opportunity I had as an undergrad.
So Barbie, Hot Wheels, Fisher-Price, American Girl, these brands that you that you were the steward of at Mattel, they're really the backbone of the American childhood. What did it mean to be the steward of that brand? And what did it feel like carrying that around?
It's a really good word to use because I felt that I was the steward of the brands. I wasn't a creator of any of those brands, but I felt a responsibility to take those brands and move them in their life cycle to the next level. And I remember I was at Oscar Mayer, which is a division of Kraft Foods in Madison, Wisconsin, and I would go out to lunch probably once a quarter with Oscar Mayer the Fourth. Now, Oscar Mayer the Fourth didn't create Oscar Mayer, but he was pretty close to the guy who did. And he had stories about the folks who created things at Oscar Mayer that I took for granted. And I respect entrepreneurs. I had tremendous respect for J.L. Kraft, for the founders of Mattel with whom I met as soon as I took the job. These are creative people, more creative than I am. They create these brands. My job is to help build the brands and grow the brands. And I felt the responsibility. I felt like I was the steward of what they created.
As I've studied your career, something that has really jumped out to me was this philosophy you had about mealtime, and that some of the most important leadership work that you did was actually in the employee cafeteria. Talk about that and what you learned through those meals.
Well, my predecessor at Mattel, had the executive dining room and had the private meals with the leadership team on a daily basis. And I did the exact opposite. We got rid of the private dining room and we went to the cafeteria. Because if you want to know what's going on in a company, go to the factory floor, go to the cafeteria, go to where the sales folks are making calls, go talk to customers, see where the action is, and people will be open with you. And it again supports my philosophy that the people working in the company know what's going on. They know what's working. They know what isn't working. And if you listen to them, you'll probably do a lot better than if you just think because you got a certain position, somehow you're better than they are, you're smarter than they are, you can figure things out that they can't. I think it's the exact opposite. I think the people on the line, on the floor, the people doing the work, they know what's going on. And if you listen to them, they'll help you figure it out.
Two really important insights there. I think whether you're running a fraternity or Fortune 500 company, one, you got to meet your people where they are. You got to spend time with them and be approachable and roll up your sleeves. But two, you got to listen. I think as executives, it's easy to think that you have it all figured out, but it sounds like you shaped your plans and strategy based on what you heard in the cafeteria.
Absolutely, Seth. And I think your point is right on. You've got to roll up your sleeves and not only demonstrate to people that you're willing to do the work, but help them achieve what they want to achieve. They want to see the company do well. They want to see their careers advance and give them the opportunity to do what they want to do in their lives and in their careers.
So let's rewind back to in 2000 when you took over Mattel. Video games hadn't taken over yet, but every leader could see that it was coming. This reminds me of what's going on with artificial intelligence right now and how quickly that's moving. When something hasn't arrived yet, leaders can do two things. They can ignore it because everything's okay, or they can overcorrect. And you did neither of those things. What was your read on what was happening and how did that drive your decision making?
Well, Seth, there were video games. They weren't as ubiquitous as they are today. People didn't have iPhones and kids playing games on iPhones the way my grandkids do today. But there were video games and there were consoles already in existence. And a lot of pundits had written off the toy industry. But the fact is, little kids want to play and do play with physical toys. Now, the physical toys are different than they were 30 years ago. They have more bells and whistles, more chips, more electronics. The toys do more things, and isn't that cool? So the toys have evolved. But I think every year I was at Mattel, the physical toy industry grew. And we ended up over the 11-year period of time doubling the revenues of Mattel while I was there. So somehow we figured out how to sell more of our toys than we had previously. And I am one who's not ready to write off things too quickly. When it comes to AI, I think AI will help us be more productive, just like the internet helped my generation be more productive. The next generation will have the next version of electronic support in the form of AI. And we all use AI already today, and it helps us. It makes us more productive. But I'm not one who's ready to write off the American or world's workforce because of AI. I think it's a tool, and it's a really cool tool, and it's an expensive tool to build right now, we're learning. But I don't think it's going to eliminate as many jobs as some pundits say.
So you just mentioned, don't overreact, don't overcorrect. But I've also heard you say, if it's broken, fix it fast. And across your 11 years at Mattel, what was the moment that really tested whether you would actually live that principle? Where was something where you felt like this is broken and I've got to fix it quickly for the future of this company?
Well, Seth, I mentioned we were losing $1 million cash a day when I joined. And so my first days were spent more with bankers than it was with shareholders and investors because we needed to borrow more money every day. And it quickly dawned on me that that's not a sustainable situation. And we're going to have to take some pretty dramatic actions to reverse course on cash coming into the business. So I joined in May. On September, we had an emergency board meeting at 10 o'clock one night. We asked the board to give us the opportunity to do three things. Number one, we were going to sell the big acquisition we had made. We bought the company for $3.4 billion, and we sold the company a year later for $50 million. A big loss. Number two, we were going to reduce the workforce of Mattel by 10%, eliminate jobs. And number three, it's not just about the employees. The owners are going to have to take a haircut too. We'll cut the dividend from, I think it was 36 cents a share to a nickel. And we debated that in the boardroom. The board approved. The next morning, we went public with the news. And I remember the scene from the Andrew Ross Sorkin book, Too Big to Fail, when Hank Paulson, who was then the Treasury Secretary in 2008, is on it throws up in the stress is so high in the financial meltdown of 2008. You see him throwing up in the trash can. I remember in the year 2000 driving home at 11 o'clock at night after this board meeting, and the next morning we were going to go public with the plan. I remember driving home, and I had a convertible because I'd moved to California, so I bought a convertible. And I pulled over on the side of the road, and I thought, I didn't, but I thought, I'm going to throw up like right now. But we had to do what we had to do, and I had to lead that. And it worked out okay. The next day, we went public with the news. I thought the stock was going to tank. It actually went up because the investors saw it as good news. We're going to get rid of some of these stupid things we had inadvertently done. We're going to fix the business. We're going to grow again and live to fight another day. And we did.
Bob, we covered a lot with Mattel, tough decisions, pivots, new products. When you look back on your leadership era, how do you want to be remembered at Mattel? What do you want your legacy to be there?
I think throughout my career, Seth, and I worked on many, many brands inside of Kraft that we talked about, I always wanted to leave the business in better shape than I found it, whatever that business was, whether it was Oscar Mayer or whether it was Kraft Singles or whether it was Maxwell House Coffee. I wanted to leave the business in better shape. I wanted to leave Mattel in better shape than I found it. And the fact is, we did build brands. We doubled the revenues of the company. We did cut costs. We had 11% fewer vice presidents when I left than when I joined. And vice presidents are the expensive headcounts. It's not the people who do actually doing a lot of the work. And we developed people. The thing I'm most proud of in the track record we had at Mattel is that for 6 consecutive years, we were named one of the best companies to work for. We were on that list. So that even though we're working harder, we're pushing ahead, we're selling more with fewer people, people still liked it. They appreciated the culture and they wanted to be there.
All right, before we dive into more about what made you successful, let's do our second rapid fire round. So this one's about moments and messages. What is the coolest moment in history you've witnessed?
Probably landing on the moon. I watched it on TV like everybody else did. But I mean, just remember how cool that was at the time. I mean, it's just awesome to believe that we could actually do that, particularly when we started the space race so far behind the Russians. And then to finish with the man with Neil Armstrong on the moon. I was alive. I saw that on television, and it's pretty awesome.
Wow. What's one moment from your life you would want to experience again?
College. I had such a good time when I was in school, but if I could do it all over again, I'd have even more fun. I'd take different courses. I'd do different things. It was a great part of my life. And it was so much fun. I'd like to do it again.
What an endorsement for all of our college students listening. A Fortune 500 CEO, been on every board, and you would do college all over again.
Absolutely.
Who's your top dinner guest, dead or alive?
Might be the Pope. I'm not Catholic, but I'm fascinated by religion and how society thinks about those things. And I read the book *Sapiens* by the Israeli historian who has tracked Homo sapiens from 35,000 years before Christ to today, and how storytelling impacts society. He would be a great person, but religion is one aspect of the storytelling that makes humans different from everything else on the planet. And I think sitting down and having dinner with a pope would be a pretty cool experience.
Absolutely. All right, you were a marketing guy. You can take a billboard out in New York City Times Square for free and put anything on it. What does that billboard say?
There's a fraternal sort of club, if you will, in the golf club that I belong to in Los Angeles. And our motto is, enjoy life. It's later than you think. And that to me is a pretty good message.
I love that. Enjoy life. It's later than you think. All right, let's get into some of the mindsets, habits, and values that have driven your success. So you've gotten every credential and accolade that your field offers. What did SIGEP at 18 years old give you in Tucson that you still use today?
It gave me a brotherhood. You mentioned Terry Lundgren. He and I are still friends. We still play golf together. It gave me camaraderie that I needed at the time. That the moment I landed in Tucson, Arizona to go to school, I did not know one person. I didn't know one soul at the University of Arizona, not one person. And I rushed that first week I was there and joined SIGEP. And that gave me a place to have my college experience. So everything about SIGEP for the 4 years I was there shaped me in a really important time in my life. And I remember that experience today.
Just a moment ago, you talked about the importance of values in decision-making as a leader. You know, when you look back on your career and all the success that you've had, what are those values that you didn't compromise on?
Integrity. We all make mistakes. I made some huge mistakes. The companies I worked with made some huge mistakes. But what I learned is if you will raise your hand and say, we messed up. I made a mistake. I did something wrong. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Here's what I'm going to do to ensure that it doesn't happen again. People will be with you. They know we're all human. It's the person who wants to hide from the mistake, who won't acknowledge the mistake, who wants to blame somebody else for something he or she didn't do. Those are the folks that get in trouble, and those are the folks that other people don't want to work for.
Most leaders are industry specialists, but you ran two iconic companies in two completely different industries. What's the one principle that really carried you through both of those experiences?
I think one of the things both those companies had in common is they are consumer facing. You mentioned that they tend to be about kids. Kraft is about nutrition and how moms or dads serve nutritious things to their kids. Mattel is about education or entertainment for kids. How do you help mom or dad provide education and entertainment for their kids? So particularly for those of us who work in consumer-facing industries, keeping an eye on the consumer in where is he or she going and how can you help them do what they want to get done with products like yours makes a big difference.
You can't build any of what you've built alone. Behind every chapter in your life, whether that was SIGAP or Kraft or Mattel or the board seats that you've had, there were people that shaped how you led. So when you look back, who are the people that made the biggest difference? And what's the lesson for our younger SIGAPs who are listening?
Yeah, business is a team sport. Business is a team sport for sure. And I had the benefit of working with some terrific teams and being part of terrific teams. And I think those of us who appreciate the impact of teamwork, just like the fraternity, just like SIGAP is a team, those of us who appreciate we're part of a team and think about it that way instead of a hierarchy, I think are advantaged.
So if you're sitting in a SIGAP chapter right now, what are the 3 moves that you can make at age 20 that will set you up for success 10 years down the line?
I'm going to go to 4, Seth. I would ask myself 4 questions. Number 1, am I going to be outworked? I think there is a direct correlation between effort and result. And I'm not surprised that some of the hardest workers in whatever it is they're doing end up being the best. I admire professional athletes, and they look so gifted. But I know behind every one of those gifted athletes, there's hours and hours and hours and hours of practice. While I'm sleeping at night, they're shooting hoops or doing whatever it is about their profession. My second question is, are you comfortable in your own skin? You have to know what you don't know, acknowledge what you don't know, and surround yourself with people who know that well. And I think many of us are not as comfortable in our own skin, and it takes us a long time to be comfortable with ourselves. And I would try and get that out of the way quickly. A third thing I think we can do, even as young people, young men, is answer the question, do other people want to see you win? There are definitely going to be times in your career, as there were times in my career, where whether or not I held my job, whether or not I succeeded in my job, was not so much in my control, but was in other people's controls. And when they had that moment, did they vote for or against me? And fortunately for me, they voted for me. And I appreciate those who wanted to see me do well. And I think you can work organizations and networks so that people want you to succeed and aren't threatened by you. And finally, in today's generation particularly, I would ask myself the question, how can I make the world a better place? How can I make a difference? What am I going to do that makes a difference? And I think my parents lived in the greatest generation. And I think the generation we're talking to now might be the next great generation. I'm not sure my generation did as much as my parents, and I'm hopeful that my generation doesn't do nearly as much to the generation we have in the audience today.
Incredibly optimistic view, and probably 4 of the best pieces of advice that I've heard for young professionals and undergraduates. But I'd ask you, what's the worst advice that you got earlier in your career? And why was it bad, and what did you learn from that?
I think the worst advice was consistent with something along the lines that wasn't going to allow me to be myself. I don't remember the specific example, but I do remember coming to the conclusion pretty early in my career that I am who I am. And if that's good enough, fine. And if it isn't, I ought to go someplace else where what I am is helpful to them. And I think at the end of the day, that's the best we can do, is be true to ourselves, be comfortable with ourselves, do what we can do, acknowledge what we can't do, get help on those things we don't do well, and it'll work out.
I think that's a simple but important reminder for our undergraduates, because I know when I was in college, I was insecure and I was looking at what everyone else was doing around me. But what I hear from you is stay true to yourself, be authentic, and measure your success by your own standards, not someone else's.
I love it. I'm going to interview you next time.
I don't know about that. So a young SIGAP who's been listening to this whole conversation probably hears, your career and the CEO seats and the board seats and all the accolades, and the natural reaction is, I couldn't do that. But what would you say to a brother that's already doubting what he can accomplish?
Well, let's step back further. Let's go before the boards and the accolades and the CEO and all that. I started working at age 15 at Leonard's Store for Men in Elmhurst, Illinois. And the first thing I did was clean toilets. When I was an undergrad at University of Arizona, one summer I worked at the Asarco copper mine south of Tucson, Arizona. And I cleaned toilets, and I fueled trucks, and I swept floors, and I dug ditches. I was a bagger at Safeway. I've bagged groceries. I know how to do that. None of us gets to where we are starting where we end up. We all start pretty much in the same place. And one of the beautiful things about doing this in the United States of America is there are opportunities here that not every society allows. And we can work hard. We can be committed to what we want to do. We can find an organization that supports us and nurtures us, like SIGAP has done for all of us on this call. And we can take advantage of those opportunities. So we don't start out with a title of CEO or anything like that. We all start out sweeping a floor. And I've done that.
Your career reminds me of the old adage that if you're too big for a small job, you're too small for a big job. And I think that's important in today's age when we want to move very quickly and we're used to getting things big and fast, that a lot of times success comes from slowing down, working harder than the person next to you, and surrounding yourself with the right people. So thank you for that. Last rapid fire round, Bob, and this one's about your legacy. What is the top bucket list item you've yet to check off?
I've checked off most everything. I'll tell you my next bucket list item. I don't know if it's my last one, but my wife and I would like to see more of Japan. And I've been fortunate to go all over the world in my career, but I end up on business trips. So when I've been to Japan, I've been to Tokyo and been in a hotel room and been to meetings. We want to experience Japan. We just came back from, believe it or not, a 30-day vacation experiencing Italy and driving around Italy and staying at Airbnbs. I have the time now that I didn't always have. So my bucket list, I think, is to continue to travel and see the world.
What is the top dream that you have for your children and grandchildren?
I want them to be happy. Two of my kids are social workers. One's a nurse. One's a commercial kid. I have 3 stepkids that are in college age and figuring out what they want to do with their lives. At the end of the day, I think every parent wants to see his or her child be happy. They don't have to do what I did. I didn't do what my father did. He was a dentist. I had no interest in being in people's mouths all day long. He loved it. I like business. I love business. He never steered me into doing what he did career-wise. He wanted me to do what I wanted to do, and I found my calling in life, which was business.
What are 3 words that you want others to use to describe you?
Hardworking, straight shooter, childlike, not childish but I like to have fun. I mean, this is a ride we're on. This is an experience we're all having, and why not enjoy it?
Well said. So I've got 3 final questions that we can hopefully tie everything together with. What is a 1-sentence piece of advice you would have for our undergraduate SIGAPs?
Gosh, it probably goes back to our billboard. Enjoy life. It's later than you think. Enjoy your college experience if you're an undergrad. It's going to end, and it is a great time of your life. arguably the best time of your life, or certainly if it isn't the best, it's right up there when you look back at your life. Enjoy the experience of college. Enjoy the career, whatever it is you choose to do, or life after college. Enjoy that, because that will have a finite shelf life, if you will. And enjoy life. I mean, my friends and I talk about QTR, quality time remaining, not to be confused with total time remaining. Total time in college is different than quality time in college. Total time in the career may not be all the quality time of the career. And in life, enjoy life while you can and enjoy the experience.
What's a final thought that you have for our listeners on leadership?
Napoleon said, a leader is a dealer in hope. I grew up in an optimistic household. I'm an optimistic person. And I think people need to see the future. Only humans, we're the only group here, only humans know that the future can be different and better than the past. And I think one of our jobs as leaders is to paint that picture for the folks with whom we work. What can their future look like? What can the company's future look like? What can the chapter's future look like? And how can we help get from here to there? I think that's the role of the leader.
And last one, what do you hope every listener takes away from your story?
I hope they enjoy the ride. I've been a lucky guy. I have enjoyed the ride. But, I have two quotes on luck that I always think about. One is Ray Kroc, who founded McDonald's when he was like 50 years old. Ray said, luck is the dividend of sweat. Or Louis Pasteur, who said, chance favors the prepared mind. I think we can have prepared minds in SIG-Ep, and especially at the undergrad level.
This was phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time, your advice. I have no doubt it will make a big impact on our listeners. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Seth. I enjoyed visiting with you today. Good luck, everybody.
Bob, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the stories. And thank you for giving us a masterclass on what it actually means to build a career that travels. Here are 4 things that I believe are worth carrying from this conversation. Number 1, enjoy life. It's later than you think. Number 2, there's no substitute for hard work. Number 3, surround yourself with people who want to see you win. And number 4, when you're tempted to count yourself out, don't. The person you are right now is closer to being Bob Eckert than you realize. If this conversation gave you something, share it with a brother who needs to hear it. Subscribe, leave us a review, and follow the SIG-Ep social media pages, because we've got more incredible stories coming. Until next time, keep learning, keep building, and keep winning.